Okay, everybody, this is my spoiler review of Black Mirror Season 6, Episode 3, Beyond the Sea. This was directed by John Crowley and written again by Charlie Brooker. So, what's really effective just in the beginning of this episode is seeing the contrast in David's life and Cliff's life, and that both of these replicas have a different family life in the sense that Cliff's is very mundane, it's boring, and David's doing all the great things as a dad, taking the kids in the movies, painting them, having fun. Everyone's smiling in that family. He's complete opposite of Cliff. And you'll see in David's story as his replica, he is having different reactions to him being a replica, where when he comes out of the movie, these fans are overjoyed to meet him and think it's really cool that he's this replica, where we get the complete opposite reaction of the Manson-esque cult who is against replicas. It's interesting, before the cult gets in that house, there is a moment when his wife sees the van outside. And too bad she didn't follow up on that. And we'll see that he has this nice romantic dance with his wife to La Mer, which is the French version, the original version of Beyond the Sea. And that will play throughout the episode. That is going to play. He's going to have literally the same dance with Lana later on. And he pleasures her the same exact way he was pleasuring his wife. Now, the sad part of all this is Rory Culkin will show up with his cult. And when they even capture David, you see when they're cutting his arm off, there's a painting he had of the back of the house in the pool. That was a nice touch. And this man says, a man sleeps in the sky while his mechanical image walks the earth, and you sleep with this abomination. He says this to the wife, just showing you what certain people would react to something like this. And he's like, we must have a punishment for someone doing something against nature like this. And he slaughters the whole family in front of him, so it gets real dark real quick. Now, before we even get to that, there is a moment before this happening that David asks Cliff how his family is, and he says, are you sure your wife will like the country? He's like, I met her once and she struck me as quite the butterfly. So this is telling you he can even notice this about this man's wife from one meeting. The thing about David is he reads people really well, where Cliff is just not have that intuition like David does. David knows she was untouched because he knows, again, he has a sense of people. He can feel her loneliness. He's emotionally intelligent, which clearly Cliff lacks. And it's so boring for Lana here with Cliff. She literally says while she's reading a book, I'm really just looking at words. And she suggests having a little party, and Cliff's like, yeah, maybe we'll do that. And you see the book she's reading, and she read at the beginning of the episode as well, is Airport, which is a book about a man who makes his job his life, and the wife's upset about this, never being there, and not there to socialize with people. So obviously her reading this book too is going to awaken those feelings even more. Now, going back to after what happened to David, this trauma, he's on the ship and David is completely distraught. And amazing acting by Josh Hartnett here. It's so good to see him back too. And his family and his replica have been destroyed. He loses everything. And when Cliff goes back to tell Lana about his state of mind, she's like, I can't even imagine the kids, Jessica, and tragic thing is she is going to have to imagine, because she is going to be slaughtered like Jessica was and lose the kids later on. And what's fascinating about this in the Black Mirror sense, the techie side of it all, is that Cliff is just talking about, I can't imagine what it's like for him when I'm down here, he's all alone up there. And Lana's like, well, couldn't they just make him another replica? And Cliff says, even if they could, what does he have left here? I really like this writing. It's really just seeing a man stuck in grief in space. And that what's a cool setup of this situation is that they still depend on each other for life. So the concerns are real for Cliff, because he can't lose David, or his real self will die up there. And that's why he's concerned, that he thinks David might have been planning to throw himself out of the ship, which he definitely was. But Lana's the one who comes up with the idea to have David use Cliff's link. So I think she also here wants a little excitement as well. And Cliff's like, that would be strange for you and Henry. And she's like, Henry doesn't need to know. What's important about that is she really miscalculated how kids have this intuition about something being off. I mean, literally the first scene we see with the other Cliff there, they show Henry, the kid, and he's already got different vibes. He knows something is off, and that will just go through the whole episode. Now, what was exciting to see was when David goes into Cliff's body, and we get to see Aaron Paul really show those acting chops, where now he's playing David as Cliff, and he does a spectacular job. This was my favorite performance of Aaron Paul since Breaking Bad. He needed a good story like this. He's been stuck in a lot of stuff that's not so great, like Truth Be Told. He was stuck in a bad season of Westworld. He needs something that is really respectable, and this was it. So I was excited to see that for him. And he even shows off how good of an actor he is in the sense of his physicality was just like Josh Hartnett's, and his voice. And so really props to him. But you see, when David as Cliff first comes here, this caterpillar likes him. That's the thing about David. He is a very approachable, charming, likable person. And Lana comforts him. They cry over his family. Again, amazing acting by Aaron Paul here. And I think she likes to finally see emotion. That's why Cliff reacts to Lana when she tells him about him crying. He's like, he cried in front of you? Like, that's something that Cliff would never see as, like, acceptable to do in front of your wife when she wants that. It's also interesting that when Cliff is on the ship, he finds a book, The Illustrated Man. This is a collection of short stories about the conflict of cold mechanics of tech and the psychology of people. This literally is this example in this story, and it's basically the concept of Black Mirror in a nutshell. It's interesting, too, that when David first comes out of the replica, he gives a handshake to Cliff. But you knew in his face right away he was already hooked to this life, this beautiful house he now loves, he's drawing. But what's interesting is once he starts to be into Lana, after that first session, he stops shaking Cliff's hand. There's a different aura about him because he knows he's about to go for this man's wife. So we'll see more and more. There's things about David that Lana likes, that he reads like she does. He suggests books. He's artsy. He's interesting. He plays music on the record player, and you can see she even likes just hearing that around. It's a different change of pace here. And that song he's playing on the record player is a song about love is the most important thing in life. And this is clearly something David believes in. And he starts charming her by showing her how to do his painting. And you knew right from there, you're like, uh-oh, you know, especially him drawing her when he got back. And you see Lana is getting in a trance by him too, because when they go to the bookstore, he has a way he strokes the book that she strokes in bed that night thinking about him. And the next day, they do a dance to the song like he did with his wife, Beyond the Sea, the French version, and then he pleasures her like he did his wife, but she stops him. This is why the son senses something's really off now, and this is why he's screwed with the painting. And you see David keeps pushing on Lana. He's like, you know he won't know, and you want this. You got to remember, this is a man who was grief-stricken, just had a horrible thing happen to him, so he's taking anything he can get at this point. So he's not really thinking any morals here. And she's like, you work your way into my home wearing my husband like a suit. Such a Black Mirror thing to say. I love that. She's like, you don't know me. And he's like, I know the way you look at me. And she's like, at you? Again, reminding us again, this is Cliff's physical body. He's being reminded he actually is. But we see David slapped Henry here, and Cliff doesn't even care. He's like, nothing I haven't done 100 times. You know Henry can be a terror. It's like, oh my God. And you know Lana didn't like this either, because Cliff is still like, we need to have him come 1 or 2 more times, and just not listening to Lana, that she doesn't want him here anymore. And you'll see, this is why I think this affair definitely never happened, because Lana will actually have Henry protected and bring him in a car until the real Cliff comes home. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough when he comes later on in a surprise visit, which we'll get to. And when Cliff confronts David about the nude paintings, David's like, why can't you see I have nothing at all? You have no idea what it's like to be me. This is going to round out by the end of the episode. That's what he is going to show him. He is going to make him feel what he felt. He's like, you have got it all and you don't even care. Your wife is alone, lonely, unsatisfied, untouched. Again, you would think, like Cliff is thinking, that did he have an affair with my wife? But he's just a man who has a good instinct in reading people. And Lana and Cliff have this moment where Cliff confronts Lana about this, but she's like, for a moment, I felt like my husband was back and I want that. I wish he did too. And Cliff says, I'm sorry. So the crazy thing about this is David and this happening and him coming into their lives made Cliff and Lana at this moment closer. And I think it really would have worked here if the tragedy didn't strike the family. But you see, David says to Cliff, I would like to apologize to her in person, say goodbye. And Cliff lies and says, she said he's a snake and a return would make her vomit. And he's like, she is mine. Probably not the best thing to say to someone like David who isn't well. It's an interesting choice by David for what he did, because there's no way I think he believed Cliff that Lana would say such a thing. He's too smart. And like I say, he knows how to read people to think that Cliff was telling the truth. I think at this point, he just wanted to give Cliff a taste of medicine that he has tasted. If it is the other way, that he believed him about Lana saying those things, I don't buy that for a second, that David would be that foolish. Now, where my biggest issue with this episode comes in, there's not many, but there is one for me, is towards the end here, because David shaves, and I think he did this to come off more trustworthy and looking more put together to Cliff before he's about to do this horrible thing and do this fake emergency and take his key. I really think, though, as much as Cliff has been established as not the brightest crayon in the box, you have to be insanely stupid to just trust David so fast after this heated conversations they just had. And him to even go so far as to check and see everything's okay and still come back and say, well, the emergency systems are faulty. We got to tell the higher ups. Come on. That's a real stretch. And then he takes his tag back. He's like, what did you do? So that was a big letdown for me to happen in this big moment, to be the way that this tragedy happens and David's able to pull this off. I wish there was another way Charlie Brooker had wrote this that was more believable, because I just don't think at that moment it felt so rushed that Cliff would just go along with all of that and just be completely blind there, because anybody who's anybody at that moment would be a little suspicious before jumping into that emergency. Yes, it was an emergency, he thought, but there still has to be like, well, hold up a minute. I'm not giving my stuff to David. I'm not giving my key to David. Come on. I did think the tragic ending worked, though, and it was really haunting when he comes back and David pulls a chair up for Cliff, like, come to the table. You're now seeing what I've gone through. You've lived through my shoes now. So besides my big gripe with that moment, I really enjoyed this episode, and I'm really impressed with this season so far as a whole. And I was really, really impressed by all the performances here. It was great to see Josh Hartnett back, and he did great. Aaron Paul just did the best performance to me since Breaking Bad. Amazing. And Kate Mara is great per usual. And I thought the writing again by Charlie Brooker was so good, and the direction was spot on too. And I thought the slower pace worked here to really make sure we bought all these relationships happening and feelings that characters were feeling. But the only mess up and slip up for that pacing and buying everything again was that moment for me with Cliff just being completely stupid in that crucial moment at the end and just trusting David like that. So overall, though, giving this one a 9.2. One of the best Black Mirror episodes in this season. Is really effective to me. It's more grounded. And some people might not like that for Black Mirror, but I really do like that, and that they're really highlighting the human aspect of this. Also, a very human episode. Let me know what you thought down below, though, of this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment, try to respond as many as I can. Please give comments. It helps in so many ways. And please subscribe so you can catch every review I do of Black Mirror. I also do celebrity interviews as well. And please follow me at Steve Varley Show on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok for more of me. And I'll see you next time.